I'm Laverna, 32, and I've spent my entire life in my younger sister's shadow. Despite this, I decided to finally celebrate my birthday with a small dinner at my favorite restaurant, wearing a dress I'd saved months to buy. I never expected my sister Meredith would deliberately dump trash all over me, laughing, as she said those words that still echo in my mind. "Now you look like a garbage can." What happened next changed our relationship forever. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever dealt with family betrayal or sibling rivalry. Trust me, what happened after I left that restaurant in tears will surprise you as much as it shocked my sister. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I was always the odd one out in my family. Our household consisted of my parents, my sister Meredith, who is 4 years younger than me and myself. From as early as I can remember, there was a clear favorite in our family, and it wasn't me. Meredith came into the world when I was 4 years old, a tiny bundle with bright blue eyes and golden curls that had everyone instantly enamored. I have faint memories of being excited about having a little sister, someone to play with and share secrets with. I imagined us becoming best friends, like the sisters I saw on television shows. That fantasy quickly dissolved as I watched Meredith become the center of our family's universe, while I was gradually pushed to the periphery. By the time I was 10 and Meredith was 6, the pattern was firmly established. When Meredith expressed interest in dance lessons, my parents immediately enrolled her in the most prestigious dance academy in our area, spending hundreds of dollars each month on lessons, costumes, and competition fees. That same year, when I asked to take art classes at the local community center, a program that cost a fraction of Meredith's dance lessons, my parents hesitated, claiming finances were tight. I eventually got to take the class, but only after I offered to do extra chores around the house to earn it. Our home became a shrine to Meredith's accomplishments. The living room walls were adorned with professional photos of her in various dance costumes, trophies lined the mantelpiece, and ribbons hung from a special display board my father built specifically for her awards. My artwork, when I brought it home from school or my community classes, was met with distracted praise before being relegated to my bedroom, deemed not quite suitable for public display. When I graduated high school with honors, having worked hard to maintain my GPA while holding a part-time job at the local library, my achievement was overshadowed by Meredith's regional dance competition that fell on the same weekend. My parents attended my graduation ceremony, but left immediately after to drive 3 hours to Meredith's competition. The celebration dinner they had promised me was rescheduled and eventually forgotten altogether. Through these experiences, I learned to become the family peacekeeper. When Meredith threw tantrums before performances, I was the one who calmed her down. When my parents were stressed about the cost of her dance competitions, I was the one who picked up extra shifts at work and contributed to the household expenses without being asked. I became the emotional caretaker, the steady presence that held things together, while everyone else's needs took priority. Despite the lack of support from my family, I never gave up on my passion for art. I drew. During lunch breaks at school, I painted late into the night in my bedroom, and I sought out mentors among my art teachers who recognized my potential. When it came time for college, I applied for every scholarship I could find and was fortunate enough to receive a partial art scholarship to a state university. I covered the remaining tuition and living expenses by working part-time jobs, sometimes 2 or 3 simultaneously, while maintaining a full course load. Those college years were difficult, but transformative. Away from my family's dynamics, I began to develop a stronger sense of self. I made friends who appreciated my artistic perspective and supported my goals. I discovered that I had a talent for teaching when I started tutoring younger students to earn extra money. By the time I graduated with a degree in fine arts and a teaching certificate, I had a clearer vision for my future than I'd ever had before. Now at 32, I've established a life for myself that brings me genuine satisfaction. I teach art at a public high school where I've recently been granted tenure. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment that I've transformed into a personal gallery and studio space with walls covered in my own paintings and shelves filled with ceramics and sculptures I've created over the years. It's not luxurious by any means, but it's mine, a space where I can fully express myself without judgment or comparison. Despite establishing some independence, I continued to play the role of family peacekeeper. When Meredith called complaining about our parents' expectations, I listened and offered advice. When my parents expressed disappointment that I hadn't chosen a more lucrative career path, I patiently explained the fulfillment I found in teaching. When family gatherings became tense, I was the one who changed the subject, made a joke, or suggested an activity to diffuse the situation. My birthdays had never been significant events in our family. Throughout childhood, they were modest affairs compared to Meredith's elaborate parties. In adulthood, they often passed with just a phone call from my parents, and maybe a text from Meredith if she remembered. Most years, I celebrated quietly with a few close friends, or sometimes just by myself with a store-bought cupcake and a new paintbrush as a self-gift. But this year, my 32nd, felt different. I had just received tenure at my school after years of dedicated work. My students had won several regional art competitions under my guidance. I had sold 3 paintings at a local gallery showing. For once, I wanted to acknowledge my achievements and milestone, with more than just a quiet evening at home. I decided it was time to prioritize myself and plan a birthday celebration that would make me feel valued and special, even if I had to create that experience largely on my own. This birthday felt significant in ways previous ones hadn't. Turning 32 might not be a milestone age for most people, but for me, it marked my first year as a permanently contracted teacher with tenure. After years of proving myself of working on annual contracts, with the constant anxiety of potential non-renewal, I had finally achieved a measure of security in my career. It felt like something worth celebrating. I began planning my birthday dinner 2 months in advance. I wanted everything to be perfect. Not in a showy, extravagant way, but in a manner that felt authentic to who I was. I chose Bella Notte, a small Italian restaurant downtown that I'd visited once before on a special occasion. It wasn't the trendiest spot in Chicago, but it had warm lighting, delicious food, and an intimate atmosphere that felt both special and comfortable. For the guest list, I kept it intentionally small. 3 of my closest colleagues from school, Dana, who taught English, Marco, the music teacher, and Eliza, the school librarian, who had become one of my dearest friends. I also invited my cousin Jake, the only family member who had consistently shown up for me over the years, and of course my parents and Meredith. Despite our complicated history, some part of me still hoped that this celebration might somehow shift our family dynamic, that they might see me differently if I created a context where I wasn't just the reliable background character in the family story. The invitations were a labor of love. I spent a weekend creating handmade cards, each one featuring a small original watercolor painting, different for each recipient, something I knew would resonate with them personally. For Dana, who loved the ocean, I painted a serene seascape. For Marco, an abstract representation of musical notes. For my parents, our childhood home. For Meredith, a dancer in motion. Because despite everything, I still recognized and respected her passion. I deliberated for weeks about whether to invite Meredith at all. Our last few interactions had been strained with her making subtle digs about my career choice and living situation. But ultimately, I decided that excluding her would create more family tension than it was worth. Besides, a small hopeful part of me wondered if seeing me celebrated might help her recognize me as a person worthy of respect rather than a convenient emotional dumping ground. The other major decision was what to wear. For years, my wardrobe had been primarily functional, comfortable clothes for teaching art with the constant risk of paint splatters or clay stains. But for this night, I wanted something that would make me feel beautiful and confident. I found an emerald green dress at a boutique downtown, far more expensive than anything I would normally buy for myself. But when I tried it on the way, it complemented my auburn hair and made my green eyes stand out, convinced me it was worth the splurge. I saved for 3 months, setting aside a small portion from each paycheck until I could afford it without guilt. As the day of my birthday dinner approached, I felt a nervous excitement I hadn't experienced in years. I scheduled a hair appointment for the afternoon of the party. Nothing dramatic, just a trim and style to freshen up my shoulder-length waves. I even splurged on a manicure, choosing a subtle gold polish that would complement my dress without being flashy. The morning of my birthday, I woke to several text messages from friends and colleagues wishing me a happy day. My parents called around lunchtime, their greeting warm but brief, with a promise to see me that evening. There was nothing from Meredith, but that wasn't unusual. As I got ready that evening, I took more time than usual with my appearance. I applied my makeup carefully, opting for a slightly more dramatic look than my usual minimal approach. I styled my hair in loose waves that framed my face softly. When I finally slipped into the emerald dress and stood before the full-length mirror on my closet door, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked dramatically different, but because I looked like someone who deserved to be seen, someone worthy of celebration and attention. "Happy birthday, Laverna," I whispered to my reflection, allowing myself a moment of genuine pride in the woman I had become, despite the lack of support and recognition I'd received along the way. The confidence I felt looking in that mirror was fragile, but real, a rare moment where the voice of self-doubt that had been cultivated by years of being overlooked was temporarily silenced. I gathered my small clutch purse, took one last look at my apartment to make sure everything was in order, and headed out to catch a rideshare to the restaurant. When I arrived at Bella Notte at exactly 7:00 p.m., the hostess greeted me with a warm smile and led me to the table I had reserved. To my surprise, everyone was already there. Donna, Marco, and Eliza sitting together on one side, my cousin Jake beside them, and my parents across from them. Meredith sat at the far end, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up as I approached. My heart sank slightly at her obvious disinterest, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was my night, and I was determined to enjoy it regardless of my sister's attitude. As I took my seat at the head of the table, I couldn't help but notice the striking contrast between the warm, enthusiastic greetings from my friends and the more reserved acknowledgement from my family. It was a physical manifestation of the emotional reality I'd lived with for years. And for a brief moment, I wondered if bringing these two worlds together had been a mistake. Bella Notte looked exactly as I remembered: warm amber lighting from vintage-style fixtures, exposed brick walls adorned with black and white photographs of the Italian countryside, and tables covered in crisp white linens. The scent of garlic, fresh basil, and tomato sauce filled the air, and soft classical music played in the background. It was elegant without being pretentious, exactly the atmosphere I had hoped for. As I settled into my seat at the head of the table, I took a moment to appreciate everyone who had come. Dana immediately complimented my dress while Marco raised his water glass in an impromptu toast. Eliza, always thoughtful, had placed a small gift bag beside my plate. My cousin Jake, who had driven in from Milwaukee for the occasion, gave me a warm hug before returning to his seat. My parents offered polite smiles and birthday wishes. My mother commented that the dress was a bit fancy for a simple dinner, while my father asked if the restaurant was expensive, with a hint of concern in his voice. Neither question was meant to be unkind, but both subtly undermined my choices. A pattern so familiar, I barely registered it anymore. Meredith had finally put her phone down, but looked distinctly uncomfortable. At 28, she was still strikingly beautiful, with the same golden curls she'd had as a child, now styled in an expensive bob. She wore a designer outfit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, and the diamond studs in her ears caught the light every time she moved. Her greeting was a casual "Hey, happy birthday" that sounded more like an obligation than a genuine wish. The server came to take our drink orders, and conversation began to flow around the table. My friend, sensing the slight tension, took the lead in keeping things light and celebratory. Dana shared a funny story about a recent classroom incident, and Marco talked about the spring concert he was planning. Eliza asked about my latest art projects, giving me a chance to share my excitement about a new technique I'd been exploring with my advanced students. Throughout these conversations, I noticed my parents leaning forward with interest whenever Meredith spoke, but merely nodding politely when I or my friends were talking. When my mother finally directed a question my way, it was telling. "So, Laverna, did you hear that Meredith might be up for promotion at her firm? Junior partner at 30 would be quite an achievement." Before I could respond, my father jumped in. "Wouldn't that be something? Always knew she'd go far in the corporate world. Smart move choosing law over something less practical." The implication was clear, and I saw Dana's eyebrows raise slightly at the thinly veiled criticism of my career choice. I smiled tightly and redirected the conversation. "That's great, Meredith. Congratulations. Eliza, didn't you want to tell everyone about the new literacy program we're developing?" Meredith had arrived 15 minutes late to the dinner, offering no explanation or apology. Throughout the appetizer course, she alternated between checking her phone under the table and making comments that subtly highlighted the differences in our lifestyles. "This wine is okay, I guess," she remarked after taking a sip of the Chianti I had selected. "Nothing like the vintage we had at the partners' dinner last month, but it's fine for casual dining." When the conversation turned to summer plans, and I mentioned I might take a road trip to visit some national parks, she laughed. "Still doing budget vacations." "You should try Europe sometime. The art in Florence would probably be useful for your teaching." Each comment stung, but I maintained my composure, determined not to let her behavior ruin my evening. My friends, bless them, ran interference whenever they could, changing subjects or asking me questions that highlighted my accomplishments and passions. When our main courses arrived, I allowed myself to relax a little. The food was delicious, and seeing my friends and cousin Jake enjoying themselves helped me focus on the positive aspects of the evening. Even my parents seemed to be warming up, with my mother asking a few questions about my tenure achievement after Eliza mentioned how rare it was for teachers to receive it so early in their careers. After the dinner plates were cleared, it was time for gifts. I hadn't expected presents and had made that clear on the invitations, but everyone had brought something anyway. Dana, Marco, and Eliza had gone in together on a beautiful set of professional-grade watercolors I had been eyeing for months, but couldn't justify purchasing for myself. Jake gave me a first edition of a book by my favorite art historian. My parents presented me with a department store gift card, impersonal but generous. When it came to Meredith's turn, she slid a gift bag across the table with a smirk. "I saw this and thought of you immediately," she said, an edge to her voice that made me wary. I opened the bag to find a book titled "Living Your Best Life: Weight Management for Women Over 30. A wave of shock and hurt washed over me as I stared at the cover, featuring a before and after photo of a woman who supposedly transformed her life by losing weight. "I noticed you've put on a few pounds since I saw you at Christmas," Meredith continued, her tone falsely sweet. "Just looking out for your health, sis." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I wasn't significantly overweight by any standard, though I had always been curvier than my naturally slender sister. Another point of comparison throughout our lives. "Thank you for your concern," I managed to say, setting the book aside, and willing myself not to show how deeply the gift had hurt me. "I'm actually quite happy with my body and health." Eliza quickly jumped in, suggesting we order dessert, and the moment passed, though I noticed my friends exchanging concerned glances. Even my parents looked embarrassed by Meredith's transparent meanness, though neither of them said anything to address it. The server brought out a beautiful lemon cake with buttercream frosting, my absolute favorite that I had specifically requested when making the reservation. As everyone sang "Happy Birthday," I tried to recapture the joy and pride I had felt looking in the mirror earlier that evening. Despite Meredith's attempt to humiliate me, I was determined to end the night on a positive note. After the cake was served, I stood to offer a brief thank you speech to everyone for coming. It wasn't something I would normally do, being someone who avoids the spotlight, but it felt important to acknowledge the significance of this celebration to me. "I just want to say thank you all for being here tonight," I began. "This year has been meaningful for me professionally and personally, and having you all here to celebrate with me means more than I can say. To my friends who support me daily, to Jake, who's always been there for me, and to my family." I never got to finish the sentence. As I was speaking, Meredith had gotten up supposedly to take her plate to the serving station near our table. As she walked behind my chair, she suddenly stumbled, and the contents of her plate, remnants of pasta sauce, half-eaten cake, and the remains of her wine, went flying all over the back of my emerald green dress. I gasped as I felt the cold food seeping through the fabric, and turned to see Meredith with an expression of shock that quickly transformed into a smirk. "Oops," she said, not sounding sorry at all. Then, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, she added with a laugh, "Now you look like a garbage can. It matches your apartment anyway." The restaurant fell silent. Nearby diners turned to stare. My friends sat frozen in disbelief. My parents looked mortified, but neither moved to intervene. Jake half rose from his seat, fury evident on his face. In that moment, I felt as if I were watching the scene from outside my body. The careful planning, the saved money, the hope that this one evening could be about me, all of it destroyed in an instant by the sister who had been casting shadows over my life since childhood. The humiliation was total, and public made worse by the deliberate cruelty of her words. Tears welled in my eyes, and for once, I made no effort to hold them back or to smooth things over. Without a word, I grabbed my purse and fled the restaurant, ignoring the calls from my friends to come back. In that moment, all I wanted was to escape the pitying stares and the crushing weight of once again being reduced to nothing in the presence of my sister. The ride home was a blur of streetlights and silent tears. I sat in the back of the rideshare, clutching my ruined dress away from the seat to avoid staining the upholstery, while the driver tactfully pretended not to notice my distress. The smell of tomato sauce and wine clung to me, a pungent reminder of my humiliation. When I finally reached my apartment building, I tipped the driver generously for his discretion and hurried inside, keeping my head down to avoid eye contact with any neighbors. Once safely behind my locked door, I leaned against it and finally allowed myself to break down completely. The sobs came from deep within years of suppressed hurt and anger pouring out as I slid to the floor, heedless of the mess I was making. My beautiful dress, the one I had saved for months to buy the one that had made me feel special for just a few hours, was ruined beyond repair. The back was stained with red sauce chocolate cake and wine, the delicate fabric already starting to set with the stains. I dragged myself to the bathroom and carefully peeled off the dress, laying it across my laundry hamper, before stepping into the shower. As the hot water washed away the physical remnants of the evening, my mind replayed Meredith's words on a loop. "Now you look like a garbage can. It matches your apartment anyway." Was that really how she saw me? How they all saw me? My apartment was modest. Yes, but I had always thought of it as a creative personal space filled with art and color and life. Was it actually just shabby and pitiful in their eyes? And by extension, was that how they saw me too? After my shower wrapped in my most comfortable robe, I noticed my phone blinking with notifications. 12 missed calls and 23 text messages, 4 voicemails. I couldn't bring myself to look at any of them yet. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and curled up on my sofa, staring blankly at the wall. My phone continued to buzz intermittently. Eventually, curiosity overcame my desire to disconnect, and I checked the screen. Multiple messages from Dana, Marco, and Eliza expressing outrage on my behalf and checking if I was okay. 2 from Jake saying he had words with Meredith after I left and was ready to drive to my place if I needed company. There was a single text from my mother. "Please call when you can. That was quite a scene. That was quite a scene." Not, "I'm sorry your sister humiliated you." Not, "What Meredith did was inexcusable." Just concern about the public embarrassment with no acknowledgement of who had caused it or why it might have hurt me. I checked my voicemail next. The first was from my father, his voice tense. "Laverna, your mother and I are very disappointed in how the evening ended. Both you and your sister need to act more maturely. Call us tomorrow when you've calmed down." Both of us. As if I had any role in what happened beyond being the target. As if fleeing the scene of my own humiliation was somehow equivalent to Meredith's deliberate cruelty. The second voicemail was from Dana, her voice fierce with loyalty. "Lav, that was beyond messed up. We're all still at the restaurant. Your sister tried to play it off as an accident, but Jake called her out. Your parents paid the bill and left with her. We've settled everything else. Call me when you can, or I'll check on you tomorrow. Love you." The third was from Eliza, gentle and concerned. "Hey, just making sure you got home okay. What happened tonight was not okay, and you didn't deserve any of it. I've got your gifts. I'll bring them to school on Monday. Rest and take care of yourself." The final voicemail made my breath catch. It was Meredith. "So dramatic as usual, Laverna. It was just a little accident, and you ran out like a teenager having a tantrum. Mom and Dad are upset with both of us now, so thanks for that. Anyway, I might stop by tomorrow to clear the air. This whole birthday thing has gotten out of hand." Just a little accident. The blatant lie infuriated me almost more than the initial act. There had been nothing accidental about what she did. From the timing to her cruel comment afterward, it had been deliberately calculated to humiliate me at the moment I had finally allowed myself to take center stage. I couldn't bring myself to respond to anyone. Instead, I turned off my phone entirely and dragged myself to bed, though sleep eluded me for hours. I stared at the ceiling, replaying not just that evening, but a lifetime of similar moments. Smaller, perhaps less public, but part of the same pattern. Meredith diminishing me, my parents allowing it, and me quietly accepting my assigned role as the family doormat. As dawn broke, I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be awakened a few hours later by persistent knocking at my door. Disoriented and exhausted, I stumbled to answer it, expecting to find one of my concerned friends. Instead, when I peered through the peephole, I saw my mother standing in the hallway, her expression tense. Reluctantly, I opened the door. "You weren't answering your phone," she said by way of greeting, stepping past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "I turned it off," I replied self-consciously, tightening my robe around myself. My mother surveyed my living room with critical eyes. "You should open the windows, it's stuffy in here, and that painting needs straightening." She gestured to one of my original pieces hanging slightly askew on the wall. "Mom," I said, summoning what little energy I had, "why are you here?" She sighed heavily, sitting down on my sofa. "Your father and I are concerned. Last night's scene was unfortunate." "Unfortunate," I repeated flatly. "Is that what we're calling it when Meredith deliberately dumps food all over me and insults me in front of a restaurant full of people?" "Laverna." My mother said, her tone shifting to the one she'd always used when she thought I was being difficult. "It was an accident. Meredith tripped." "She did not trip," I said firmly. "She did it on purpose, and then she called my home a garbage can. How can you defend that?" "You've always been so sensitive about your sister," my mother replied. "She can be thoughtless sometimes, yes, but you know she doesn't mean any harm. And running out of the restaurant like that, it was embarrassing for everyone." I stared at her in disbelief. "I was covered in food. My dress was ruined. She humiliated me on purpose at my own birthday dinner. And you're concerned about me embarrassing you by leaving—" "That's not what I meant." She backtracked, though it clearly was. "Look, Meredith feels terrible. She wants to talk to you. She's coming by later today." "I don't want to see her," I said immediately. "Laverna." My mother's voice took on a pleading quality. "She's your sister. Family forgives each other. Whatever happened last night, you need to move past it. That's what you've always been good at, keeping the peace." And there it was, the explicit acknowledgement of the role I'd been assigned, the peacekeeper, the one who forgave, who overlooked, who accepted less so that others could have more, the one who pretended not to notice when she was being treated as less than. As I looked at my mother, really looked at her, I saw for the first time how invested she was in maintaining this dynamic. It wasn't just Meredith who benefited from my relegation to second place. My parents did too. It absolved them from having to confront the unfairness they had fostered, from acknowledging their own preferential treatment, from the difficult work of parenting both daughters equally. "I think you should go," I said quietly. "I need some time to myself." "But Meredith," I said, "I need time." I repeated more firmly this time. "I'll deal with Meredith in my own way, but not today. Please respect that." My mother looked genuinely surprised by my assertion, as if the concept of me having boundaries was entirely novel. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, she gathered her purse and stood. "Very well, but don't let this fester, Laverna. It's not healthy to hold on to resentment." With that final bit of advice, placing the responsibility for healing once again entirely on my shoulders, she left. I locked the door behind her and leaned against it, a strange sense of clarity washing over me. In my bedroom, I caught sight of my ruined dress draped over the hamper. I picked it up, examining the stains that had now set into the fabric, making it irreparable. Looking at that dress, a tangible symbol of my hopes for recognition and celebration now destroyed, something shifted inside me. Like the fabric of the dress, a pattern had been permanently altered. I couldn't go back to being the person who accepted this treatment, who prioritized family peace over my own dignity, who believed I deserved less than basic respect. "No more," I whispered to myself. "This ends now." After my mother left, I spent the rest of the morning trying to process what had happened and what I wanted to do about it. I cleaned my apartment, not because my mother's criticism had hit home, but because the physical activity helped clear my mind. As I moved through the familiar motions of tidying, dusting, and rearranging, my initial shock and hurt began to crystallize into something stronger: determination. By early afternoon, I had turned my phone back on and responded to my concerned friends, thanking them for their support and assuring them I was okay. I listened to two new voicemails, one from Jake asking if I needed anything, and another from Meredith informing me she would be stopping by around 4 to sort things out. Her tone was more annoyed than apologetic, as if my reaction to her cruelty was the real problem that needed addressing. I considered texting her to cancel to tell her I wasn't ready to see her yet, but something stopped me. Perhaps it was time to face the situation head on rather than retreating as I always had before. If Meredith wanted to talk, we would talk, but this time it would be on my terms. I showered and dressed carefully in jeans and a simple blue blouse that I knew brought out the color of my eyes. I pulled my hair back into a neat ponytail and applied minimal makeup, not to impress Meredith, but to feel put together and strong. This wasn't about looking good for her. It was about feeling armored for the confrontation ahead. At precisely 3:55 p.m., my doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and opened the door to find Meredith standing there, looking immaculate as always, in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "You look better than I expected," she said by way of greeting, brushing past me into the apartment without waiting to be invited. "Mom said you were pretty upset." "Hello to you too, Meredith," I replied, closing the door behind her. "Yes, having food dumped on me in public tends to be upsetting." She rolled her eyes, dropping her expensive handbag onto my sofa and glancing around the apartment with thinly veiled disdain. "It was an accident, Laverna. I tripped. You didn't have to make such a huge scene about it." "It wasn't an accident," I said firmly. "You did it on purpose, and then you called my home a garbage can." "God, you're still so sensitive." She sighed, as if my reaction was the unreasonable part of this equation. "Look, I came here to smooth things over because Mom and Dad are upset about what happened. Can we just agree to move past it?" In that moment, looking at my sister's impatient expression, I realized something profound. She truly believed she was entitled to my forgiveness, to a clean slate, to continuing our relationship on the exact same terms as before, regardless of her behavior. It was the assumption of someone who had never faced consequences for her actions, especially not from me. "No," I said simply. "We can't just move past it." Meredith blinked, clearly surprised by my response. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, Meredith. I'm not going to pretend what you did was an accident. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt me. And I'm not going to pretend this is the first time you've deliberately tried to humiliate me." "Oh, please," she scoffed, though I noticed a flicker of unease in her expression. "Don't be so dramatic." "It's not dramatic to expect basic respect from my sister," I countered. "What you did last night was cruel, Meredith. It was meant to hurt and embarrass me, and it worked. But what I can't figure out is why. Why would you want to ruin one of the few times in my life I was actually celebrating myself? Because it's always about you." She burst out, the words exploding from her with unexpected force. "It's always been about you." I stared at her in genuine confusion. "What are you talking about? Nothing has ever been about me in our family. You've been the center of attention since the day you were born." "That's what you think," she said bitterly. "Poor Laverna, always overlooked, always the victim. You have no idea what it's been like growing up as your sister." "Enlighten me," I said, crossing my arms. "Tell me how difficult it's been being the golden child, getting everything you ever wanted while I worked twice as hard for half the recognition." Meredith laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think that's how it was? You were the talented one, Laverna, the smart one, the creative one. Do you have any idea what it's like growing up with a sister who can draw like a professional artist at age 12, who gets straight A's without seeming to try, who has real friends who actually care about her instead of people who just want to be around her, because her parents have money?" I felt as if the floor had suddenly shifted beneath my feet. This perspective was so foreign, so contrary to my lived experience, that I couldn't immediately process it. That's not how it was," I stammered. "It is from where I was standing," Meredith insisted. "You think I didn't notice how Dad would look at your artwork? He never looked at my dance trophies that way. like he was actually impressed, not just going through the motions. You think I didn't see how Mom would brag to her real friends? Not the society wives, but the ones she actually cared about. About your college scholarship. Laverna did it all on her own, she'd say, like it was the most amazing thing in the world. But they gave you everything, I protested. The lessons, the competitions, the praise. They gave me things, Meredith interrupted. Things are easy, writing checks is easy, but the way they respect you, that can't be bought. And it drove me crazy because no matter how many trophies I won or how successful I became, I could never earn what you had naturally. I sank onto the sofa trying to reconcile this version of our childhood with my own memories. If that's true, why didn't you ever say anything? Why have you spent years putting me down, making me feel less than? Meredith's composure cracked slightly, a vulnerability showing through that I rarely saw. Because it was easier than admitting I was jealous. Because I didn't know how else to deal with it. Because being mean to you was the only way I knew how to feel better about myself. That's really messed up, Meredith. I know, she admitted, and to my shock, tears welled in her eyes. I know it is. But do you have any idea what it's like living in the shadow of someone who doesn't even realize they're casting it? You've always been so authentic. People are drawn to that. I've had to carefully construct every aspect of my life to get the same recognition you get just by being yourself. I shook my head, still struggling to process this revelation. But your life is perfect. The career, the apartment, the clothes, it's all a facade. She interrupted, her voice breaking. I'm drowning in credit card debt. The firm is downsizing and I'm on the list to be cut. My boyfriend left me last month for someone more genuine. His words. And I'm living in an apartment I can't afford because I was too proud to admit I couldn't keep up with the lifestyle everyone expects from me. As she spoke, I really looked at my sister, perhaps for the first time in years. Behind the perfect hair and designer clothes, I could see dark circles carefully concealed with expensive makeup, the slight tremor in her hands as she gesticulated, the thinness that I had attributed to good genes, but now recognized as stress and possibly poor eating habits. Why didn't you tell me any of this? I asked softly. And admit that your mess of a life is actually more together than mine. She laughed bitterly. That my poor art teacher sister with her tiny apartment is actually happier and more fulfilled than I am. How could I do that when I've spent years convincing myself, and everyone else, that I'm the successful one? So last night, I saw you in that beautiful dress surrounded by friends who genuinely care about you celebrating a career milestone you actually earned. And I snapped. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand seeing you happy and centered when my own life is falling apart. It was easier to tear you down than to admit how much I envied you. The confession hung in the air between us, shocking in its rawness. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, processing the seismic shift that had just occurred in our understanding of each other. I'm sorry, Meredith finally said, her voice small and unfamiliar. What I did was horrible. I've been horrible to you for years. I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to speak to me again. I studied my sister's face, seeing beyond the perfect makeup to the insecurity beneath. The revelation didn't erase the hurt of last night or the years of subtle cruelty, but it did something I hadn't expected. It humanized Meredith in a way she had never allowed before. I don't hate you, Meredith, I said carefully, but I can't just forgive and forget either. What you did hurt me deeply, and it was just the culmination of a pattern that's gone on far too long. If we're going to have any kind of relationship going forward, things need to change fundamentally. She nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. I understand. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I didn't want you to think I didn't know how wrong I was. Thank you for that, I said. It's a start, but there's more we need to address, not just between us, but with Mom and Dad too. This family dynamic has been toxic for both of us in different ways. Meredith looked uncertain, but nodded again. You're right. But they're not going to like having their parenting questioned. Probably not. I agreed. But I'm done pretending everything is fine when it isn't. I'm done being the family peacekeeper at the expense of my own well-being. As Meredith prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Your apartment isn't a garbage can, by the way. It's actually really nice. It feels like you. Mine looks like a furniture showroom because that's basically what it is. All surface, no substance. The small admission felt like a peace offering. Not enough to heal the wound entirely, but a genuine step in the right direction. Thank you, I said simply. After she left, I sat in the quiet of my apartment processing the conversation. The revelation of Meredith's perspective had been genuinely shocking, forcing me to reconsider aspects of our shared history I had thought were immutable. But it didn't change the fact that her behavior had been harmful, nor did it absolve our parents of their role in creating the unhealthy dynamic between us. With newfound clarity, I knew what I needed to do next. It was time to address the root of the problem, the family system that had damaged both Meredith and me in different but equally significant ways. For the first time in my life, I felt ready to confront that system head-on, regardless of the discomfort it might cause. 2 days after my conversation with Meredith, I texted my parents asking to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between my apartment and their suburban home. My mother responded immediately, saying they were relieved. I was ready to put this unfortunate incident behind us. Her assumption that I was seeking reconciliation rather than confrontation was telling, but I didn't correct her. Some conversations needed to happen in person. I spent the intervening day preparing both emotionally and practically. I made notes of specific incidents I wanted to address, not just recent ones, but patterns that stretched back to childhood. I practiced what I wanted to say with Eliza, who had come over with ice cream and sympathy the day after my birthday disaster. She had listened without judgment as I recounted my conversation with Meredith, then helped me refine my approach for speaking with my parents. Remember, she advised, this isn't about making them admit they were wrong or winning an argument. It's about clearly expressing your perspective and setting boundaries for the future. When Sunday afternoon arrived, I dressed in an outfit that made me feel confident but comfortable. Dark jeans, a soft teal sweater, and my favorite ankle boots. I wore minimal makeup and pulled my hair back in a simple style. This wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about being authentically myself. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early, selected a table in a quiet corner, and ordered a chai latte to calm my nerves. My parents arrived precisely on time, my father checking his watch as they entered as if to confirm this fact. They spotted me and made their way over my mother's expression, concerned my father's more guarded. Laverna, dear, my mother began as they sat down. You look well. We were worried about you after everything. I'm okay, I said simply. Thank you for meeting me. Of course, my father replied. Though I have to say I'm not sure why we couldn't just have this conversation at the house. Your mother made a roast. I wanted neutral ground, I explained. What I have to say isn't easy, and I thought this would be better. My parents exchanged a glance. That sounds rather serious, my mother said with a nervous laugh. It was just a little accident at your birthday dinner. There's no need to make it into something bigger. It wasn't an accident, I said firmly. And yes, this is serious, but it's not just about what happened at the dinner. It's about a pattern that's existed in our family for as long as I can remember. My father's posture stiffened. What pattern? I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I had rehearsed but still feared. The pattern of treating Meredith and me differently, of giving her preferential treatment while expecting me to accept less, of enabling her worst behaviors while minimizing my feelings and achievements. My mother's face flushed. That's simply not true. We've always loved both our daughters equally. Love isn't the issue, I clarified. I don't doubt that you love me, but the way you've expressed that love, the way you've parented us, has created a damaging dynamic for both Meredith and me. This is ridiculous, my father interjected. We gave you both everything you needed. If Meredith required more attention or resources, it was because her activities were more demanding. I had anticipated this defense. Dad, when I was 16, I won a regional art competition. The ceremony was on the same day as one of Meredith's regular dance recitals. Not a competition, just a recital. Both of you went to her recital. Neither of you came to see me receive my award. That was years ago, my mother protested, and Meredith would have been devastated if we'd missed her performance. And how do you think I felt when neither of my parents showed up to one of the most important moments of my young life? I asked quietly. But that's just one example. There are dozens more. The different standards you held us to, the way you celebrated her accomplishments while treating mine as afterthoughts, the way you've consistently allowed her to treat me disrespectfully without consequence. My father leaned forward, his expression darkening. I think you're being extremely unfair. We've supported your art hobby. It wasn't a hobby, I interrupted. It was and is my passion and now my career. The fact that you still call it a hobby after all these years is exactly what I'm talking about. Well, excuse us for wanting one of our daughters to have a stable career with decent earnings potential. My father replied, his voice rising slightly. Not everyone has the luxury of pursuing their passions without concern for practical matters. I put myself through college, I reminded him. I worked multiple jobs while maintaining a full course load. I built my career through hard work and dedication. And I'm stable. I have 10-year health insurance retirement savings. My life isn't lacking in practical matters. That's not what your father meant, my mother said quickly, placing a calming hand on my father's arm. We're proud of what you've accomplished, Laverna. We just worried about you, that's all. I pulled my phone from my pocket and pulled up the photo Eliza had sent me, one she had taken at the birthday dinner just moments after Meredith had dumped the food on me. In it, my face was a mask of shock and hurt, my dress visibly stained, while Meredith stood behind me with a smirk that belied any claim of accident. Look at this, I said, sliding the phone across the table. Does this look like an accident to you? Does this look like something a loving sister does? My parents stared at the photo in uncomfortable silence. My mother was the first to speak, her voice subdued. Meredith can be impulsive sometimes. Impulsive is buying shoes you don't need, I countered. This was deliberate cruelty. And your first response was to ask me to forgive her, to smooth things over to keep the peace, just as you've always expected me to do. You've never held her accountable, and you've never protected me from her behavior. What exactly do you want from us, Laverna? My father asked, a note of defensiveness still evident in his voice. We can't change the past. No, you can't, I agreed. But you can acknowledge it. You can recognize the role you played in creating a dynamic where Meredith felt entitled to treat me badly, and I felt obligated to accept it. You can commit to changing how things work moving forward. My mother's eyes had filled with tears. I never meant, we never intended. I know, I said more gently. I don't think you deliberately set out to create this situation. But intention doesn't negate impact. The fact is, your parenting choices have hurt both of us. Me by making me feel less valued, and Meredith by failing to teach her empathy, accountability, or healthy coping mechanisms. My father looked genuinely confused. How has any of this hurt Meredith? She's the one who's always gotten what she wanted. Did you know she's drowning in debt, that she might lose her job, that her relationship ended because she can't be authentic with people, that she's been jealous of me for years because she thinks you respect me more than her? The shock on their faces confirmed they had no idea about any of this. Like me, they had been operating under the assumption that Meredith's life was as perfect as she presented it to be. She never said anything, my mother whispered. Neither did I pointed out, because neither of us felt we could be honest about our struggles without disappointing you or losing your approval. That's the family culture you created, one where appearance matters more than reality, where keeping the peace matters more than addressing problems. A heavy silence fell over the table. My father stared into his untouched coffee. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. I waited, giving them space to process what I'd said. What do you want us to do? My father finally asked, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. I need you to hear me. Really hear me. When I tell you how your actions have affected me, I began. I need you to respect my boundaries going forward, which includes not dismissing my feelings or experiences. I need you to hold Meredith accountable for her behavior toward me instead of making excuses for her. And I need you to recognize that both of your daughters are valuable, accomplished adults whose worth isn't determined by their salary or social status. My mother nodded slowly. I think, I think we can try to do that. She glanced at my father, who was still staring at his coffee. Right, Robert. My father looked up, and I was startled to see tears in his eyes, something I could count on one hand the number of times I'd witnessed in my life. I never wanted to hurt you, Laverna. I thought we were doing the right thing, pushing you to be practical, supporting Meredith's ambitions. I didn't realize. His voice trailed off, but the crack in his usual stoic facade told me more than words could have. For perhaps the first time he was seeing our family dynamic from a perspective other than his own. This isn't about blame, I said softly. It's about recognition and change. We can't move forward if we can't be honest about where we've been. I'm sorry, my mother said, reaching across the table to take my hand. I'm so sorry if we made you feel less loved or less valued. That was never our intention. I know, I acknowledged. And I'm not asking for perfection going forward. I'm just asking for awareness and effort. We continued talking for another hour, diving deeper into specific incidents and patterns, some of which my parents remembered differently or hadn't registered as significant. There were moments of defensiveness, especially from my father, but also moments of genuine recognition and regret. By the time we parted, we had reached a tentative understanding, not a complete resolution, but a starting point for rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. As I walked to my car afterward, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I'd set down a burden I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The conversation hadn't been easy, and I knew there would be setbacks and struggles ahead. But for the first time, I felt seen by my parents in a way I never had before. And more importantly, I had seen myself, not as the peacekeeper, the overlooked daughter, or the family doormat, but as someone worthy of respect and fair treatment. Someone who could speak her truth even when it was difficult. Someone who could set boundaries and expect them to be honored. It was, I realized, the best birthday gift I could have given myself. The weeks following these confrontations were both challenging and liberating. I focused on my own healing process, pouring my emotions into my art, and leaning on the support of my true friends. I started seeing a therapist to work through the lingering effects of years of family dynamics, learning to recognize and counteract the negative self-talk that had become so ingrained I barely noticed it anymore. My relationship with Meredith entered a strange tentative phase. We communicated primarily through text messages at first, brief, careful exchanges that acknowledged the elephant in the room without directly addressing it. 2 weeks after our confrontation, she sent me a link to a financial literacy course she had enrolled in with the simple message, "Taking steps to fix my mess. Thought you should know." I replied with genuine encouragement, and gradually our communications became more frequent and less guarded. There were no dramatic heart-to-hearts or tearful reconciliations, just small steps toward a more honest relationship. When she texted to share that she had been put on a performance improvement plan at work, rather than being immediately laid off, I offered to help her prepare for her evaluation meetings. When I sent her photos of a new painting I was working on, she responded with specific, thoughtful observations, rather than the dismissive comments I had grown used to. With my parents, progress was similarly incremental. My mother made more consistent efforts, calling me regularly to ask about my teaching and art, with what seemed like genuine interest. She sent me an article about an upcoming exhibition at the Art Institute that she thought I might enjoy, a small gesture, but one that acknowledged my passion in a way she rarely had before. My father struggled more visibly with changing established patterns. Our conversations remained somewhat stilted, but I noticed him making conscious efforts to ask about my work and to refrain from making comparative comments about Meredith's career. During one phone call, when I mentioned a student whose artwork had been selected for a citywide showcase, he surprised me by saying, "You must be a very good teacher for your students to achieve at that level." It wasn't effusive praise, but coming from my father, it felt significant. 3 weeks after my birthday, Dana, Marco, and Eliza surprised me with a do-over celebration at Eliza's apartment. They decorated with balloons and streamers, ordered food from my favorite Thai restaurant, and even got a small lemon cake with a single candle. "We figured you deserved a birthday that didn't end in disaster," Dana explained as she poured wine for everyone. "To Laverna," Marco toasted, raising his glass. "Artist, teacher, and the strongest person we know." I was touched by their thoughtfulness and by the realization that these people, who had no biological obligation to care about me, had consistently shown up for me in ways my family often hadn't. They had seen my worth without needing me to prove it, had celebrated my successes without qualification, had stood by me when I was at my lowest. This, I realized, was what unconditional support felt like. The most unexpected development came the following weekend, when I held a small exhibition of my students' work at the school. I had organized it as a fundraiser for art supplies, displaying pieces from students of all skill levels, and offering some pieces for sale, with proceeds going back to the art program. I was helping a group of parents understand a collaborative sculpture when I looked up and saw my mother standing in the doorway of the gymnasium, looking somewhat out of place but determined. More surprising still was what she was carrying, a beautifully wrapped package that was unmistakably the shape of a canvas. "Mom," I said, excusing myself from the parents, "I didn't know you were coming." "I should have called first," she admitted, "but I wanted to surprise you. This is impressive, Laverna. Did your students really create all of this?" "They did," I confirmed, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "With guidance, of course, but the vision and execution are all theirs." She nodded, looking around the room with new eyes. "I can see why you love teaching. You're making a real difference here." The observation, so simple yet so validating, caught me off guard. Before I could respond, she held out the package she had brought. "This is for you, a belated birthday gift, a proper one this time." Curious, I unwrapped it to find a beautiful set of professional-grade oil paints, the expensive kind I rarely bought for myself, along with a handwritten card. Inside the card was a gift certificate to a prestigious weekend art workshop I had mentioned wanting to attend months ago, but had decided was too expensive to justify. "Mom, this is incredibly thoughtful," I said, genuinely moved. "How did you know about the workshop?" "I asked Eliza," she admitted. "I wanted to get you something that mattered to you, not just what I thought you should want." The fact that she had reached out to my friend had made the effort to learn what would truly make me happy, rather than imposing her own ideas. It was a small but meaningful shift in our dynamic. As we walked around the exhibition together, my mother asked questions about the different techniques and media, showing more interest in my artistic world than she had in years. There were still awkward moments, still the ghost of old patterns in some of her comments, but there was also a genuine effort to connect with me on my terms. When we parted, she hugged me, a real hug, not the perfunctory embrace I was accustomed to. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "I don't think I've said that enough over the years, but I am. Your father is too, in his way." "Thank you," I replied, allowing myself to accept the compliment without qualification or deflection. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey of the past month. The public humiliation of my birthday dinner had been painful, but it had also been the catalyst for changes I might never have had the courage to initiate otherwise. By dumping trash on me and calling me a garbage can, Meredith had inadvertently forced us all to confront the trash in our family dynamics. The toxic patterns, the unspoken resentments, the harmful assumptions that had shaped our relationships for decades. The healing process was far from complete. There would be setbacks and old habits to overcome. Trust would need to be rebuilt through consistent actions, not just words or temporary efforts. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt hopeful about the possibility of having relationships with my family members that were based on mutual respect and genuine understanding, rather than assigned roles and unspoken expectations. More importantly, I had found a new relationship with myself. I was no longer defined by being the overlooked daughter, the family peacekeeper, the one who accepted less. I had proven to myself that I could stand up for my worth, could set boundaries and hold them, could speak uncomfortable truths, even when it was difficult. 6 months after my disastrous 32nd birthday, I celebrated my half-birthday, a tradition I had invented for myself in childhood during the years when my actual birthday was overlooked. This time there was no restaurant reservation, no carefully chosen dress, no elaborate plans. Instead, I spent the evening in my apartment painting while three of my closest friends lounged around drinking wine and sharing stories. My easel was set up by the window, capturing the golden light of sunset as I worked on a self-portrait, something I had rarely attempted before. On my phone was a simple text from Meredith. "Happy half birthday. The painting looks amazing so far." She had seen it during her visit the previous weekend, a visit that had been slightly awkward but largely pleasant, with no barbed comments or competitive undertones. There was also a voicemail from my parents singing "Happy Half Birthday" in deliberately off-key voices that made me laugh out loud when I played it for my friends. As I added touches of gold to the painting, capturing the light reflected in the subject's eyes, I felt a deep sense of contentment wash over me. My life wasn't perfect. My family relationships were still works in progress, but I had found something invaluable through this painful journey. My voice, my boundaries, and the courage to insist on being treated with the respect I deserved. The woman in the painting looked back at me with clear, confident eyes. Not a garbage can, but a vessel of strength, creativity, and newfound self-worth. It was, I realized, the most authentic self-portrait I had ever created. "To new beginnings," I said, raising my paintbrush in a toast that my friends echoed with their wine glasses. And in that moment, surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was, I knew with certainty that while the path to healing wasn't always straight or easy, it was infinitely worthwhile. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who treated you unfairly? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about finding your voice and setting healthy boundaries. Share this video with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves in difficult family situations. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, recognizing your own worth is the first step toward healing and creating the life you deserve.